The morning sun peeked through the tall windows of the county courthouse, casting long rectangles of light across the polished floor. It was Tuesday, always the busiest day at court, and the hallways buzzed with people rushing to their hearings. Among them sat Joe Miller, a 68-year-old man with gray hair and tired blue eyes. He wore a navy suit that had seen better days and kept checking his watch every few minutes. Joe was not happy to be here. The traffic ticket in his pocket felt heavy, and so did his heart. He had missed a stop sign 3 weeks ago while driving home from the grocery store. The police officer had been kind but firm. Now Joe faced a fine he could barely afford on his small pension. "Case number 47 will be heard in 1 hour," called a voice over the speaker. Joe sighed. That was his case. Another hour of waiting. Joe had been waiting most of his life, it seemed. He had waited to come home from Vietnam all those years ago. He had waited for the nightmares to stop. He had waited for someone to understand what he had seen and done in that faraway place. Now, as an old man, he was still waiting. On his suit lapel, Joe wore 3 small pins. One was the American flag. One showed the years he served in Vietnam. The third was his Purple Heart medal pin, which he received after being injured in battle. He didn't wear them to brag. He wore them because they were part of who he was, even if most people didn't notice or care anymore. At the front desk, Susan Mason sorted papers into neat piles. Her brown hair was pulled back, and she moved quickly and efficiently. As the court clerk, she made sure all the files were in order for the judge. Today had not gone as planned. The babysitter had called in sick, and Susan had no choice but to bring her daughter to work. "Mom, can I wheel around a little?" asked 8-year-old Lily Mason, looking up from her coloring book. "I'm bored." Susan glanced at her daughter and smiled. Lily sat in her wheelchair, her legs covered by a bright purple blanket. Her blonde hair was tied in 2 braids, and her eyes were curious and bright. "Stay where I can see you," Susan said. "And don't bother anyone. People are here for serious reasons." "I know, Mom," Lily said, already pushing her wheels forward. Lily had been in a wheelchair since she was 5 years old. A car crash had taken away her ability to walk, but it hadn't taken her smile or her spirit. She had learned to do almost everything from her chair, and she moved through the world with a confidence that surprised many adults. The courthouse was interesting to Lily. She liked the echo of her wheels on the floor and how important everyone looked. She wheeled past lawyers in dark suits, past police officers with shiny badges, past worried-looking people waiting for their turn with the judge. Then she noticed the old man sitting alone on a bench. What caught her eye were the pins on his jacket. Last month, her class had learned about veterans and the sacrifices they made for their country. Her teacher, Mrs. Bell, had explained how important it was to thank veterans for their service. Lily wheeled closer to Joe Miller. He didn't notice her at first. He was lost in thought, his mind far away from the courthouse, back in the humid jungles where he had spent his youth. "Excuse me, sir," Lily said, her voice clear and unafraid. Joe looked up, surprised to see a child in a wheelchair addressing him. His eyes, which had been distant, now focused on the little girl. "Are you a veteran?" Lily asked, pointing to his pins. "We learned about veterans in school." Joe straightened a bit in his seat. "Yes, I am," he said. His voice was rough from years of not using it much. He lived alone and sometimes went days without speaking to anyone. "Thank you for serving our country," Lily said with a smile. She held out her small hand toward him, the way her teacher had shown the class. Joe stared at her hand for a moment. It had been a long time since anyone had thanked him for his service. It had been a long time since anyone had really seen him at all. Most people looked past old men like him, as if they were already ghosts. He reached out and gently shook her hand. His own hand was large and weathered, with spots of age and old scars. "You're welcome, young lady," he said. Something warm stirred in his chest, a feeling he had almost forgotten. "I'm Lily," she said. "What's your name?" "Joe Miller," he replied. "What are those pins for?" Lily asked, pointing again to his lapel. Joe touched the pins with his fingertips. "This one shows I served in Vietnam. That was a war a long time ago." "Was it scary?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. Joe paused. No one had asked him that question in a simple, honest way for decades. Most people either wanted to hear hero stories or didn't want to hear anything at all. Yes, he said finally. It was very scary. Lily nodded seriously. I was scared when I had my accident, she said, patting the arm of her wheelchair. But my mom says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what you need to do even when you are scared. Joe looked at her with new interest. Your mom is a smart woman. She works here, Lily said, turning to point at Susan, who was watching them from her desk with a curious expression. Susan gave a small wave, which Joe returned awkwardly. Are you in trouble? Lily asked, turning back to Joe. Joe almost smiled. Not big trouble. I missed a stop sign while driving. Lily's face brightened. My mom missed a stop sign once. She had to pay a ticket. That's what I'm here for today, Joe said. Lily wheeled a bit closer. Do you have any grandkids? The question caught Joe by surprise. No, he said after a moment. I never had children of my own. Why not? Lily asked with the directness that only children can manage. Joe's mind flashed to Mary, the woman he had loved before Vietnam. She had married someone else while he was overseas. By the time he came back, changed by what he had seen, it was too late to start over. It just didn't happen for me, he said simply. Lily considered this. That's too bad. You would make a good grandpa. Joe felt something catch in his throat. He looked away for a moment, blinking rapidly. Lily, Susan called from the desk. Time to come back. I have to go, Lily said. But it was nice to meet you, Mr. Miller. She began to turn her wheelchair around. It was nice to meet you too, Lily, Joe said. He watched as she skillfully wheeled back to her mother's desk. For the first time in years, Joe felt truly seen. Not as an old man, not as a burden, not as a reminder of a war many wanted to forget, but as a person with a story worth acknowledging. The courthouse seemed a little less cold now. Joe still had to face the judge, still had to figure out how to pay a fine on his limited income. But something had shifted inside him. A small hand had reached across the years and pulled him back into the world of the living. As Joe continued to wait for his case to be called, he kept glancing over at Lily. She had gone back to her coloring book, her tongue sticking out slightly as she concentrated. Susan caught him looking and gave him a real smile this time. Joe straightened his tie and touched his service pins. He would hold his head high when his case was called. After all, a brave young lady was watching. Joe Miller sat very still on the courthouse bench. His mind was no longer on the traffic ticket. Instead, he was thinking about Vietnam. Talking to Lily had brought back memories he had tried to forget for many years. Joe closed his eyes for a moment. He could almost feel the humid air and hear the sounds of the jungle. He had been only 19 when he went to war. Just a boy, really. Most of the men in his unit didn't make it home. Joe had survived, but part of him had stayed behind, in that faraway place. He remembered the children in the Vietnamese villages. They would run alongside the American soldiers, sometimes begging for candy or gum. One little girl, about 7 years old, had given Joe a small bracelet made of colored string. He had kept that bracelet for years, until it finally fell apart. From age, Mr. Miller, a voice called, pulling him from his thoughts. Joe looked up to see Lily wheeling back toward him. She had a paper in her hand. I drew this for you, she said, holding up a colorful picture. It showed a stick-figure man standing next to an American flag. The man wore what appeared to be a uniform, and he had a big smile on his face. Joe took the drawing with careful hands. Thank you, Lily, he said. His voice was a bit rough. Is this supposed to be me? Lily nodded proudly. Yes. I gave you a smile because heroes should be happy. Joe didn't know what to say. He couldn't remember the last time someone had given him a gift, even a simple drawing. I'm not really a hero, he said quietly. Lily frowned. But you fought in a war to protect people. That's what heroes do. Joe looked at her serious little face. How could he explain to a child that war wasn't like the stories in books or movies? How could he tell her about the fear and pain and loss? Some people think the Vietnam War was a mistake, he said carefully. When many of us came home, people were angry. They didn't treat us like heroes. Lily considered this with a thoughtful expression. Well, that doesn't seem fair, she said finally. You still tried to do something brave. Before Joe could respond, a court officer approached them. Mr. Miller, your case will be called in 5 minutes. Please come to courtroom C. Joe nodded and slowly stood up. His knees ached from sitting too long. He carefully folded Lily's drawing and put it in his inside jacket pocket, right over his heart. I have to go now, he told Lily. Thank you for the picture. Good luck, Lily said. Maybe the judge won't be too mad about the stop sign. Joe gave her a small smile. Maybe. As Joe walked toward courtroom C, he heard wheels behind him. He turned to see Lily following him. Can I watch? She asked. Mom said I could if I stay quiet. Joe looked over at Susan, who was gathering some files. She nodded to confirm what Lily had said. I suppose that would be all right, Joe said, surprised that anyone would be interested in his case. They entered the courtroom together, Joe walking slowly and Lily wheeling beside him. The room was bigger than Joe expected, with rows of wooden benches and a tall desk at the front where the judge would sit. Joe took a seat in the front row. Lily positioned her wheelchair in the aisle next to him. More people filed in, filling the benches behind them. Most were there for their own cases, looking nervous or bored or angry. A door opened at the side of the room, and a court officer entered. All rise for Judge Howard, he announced in a loud voice. Everyone stood up except for Lily in her wheelchair. Joe's legs protested as he forced himself to his feet. Judge Howard was a tall man with gray hair and glasses. He wore a black robe and had a serious expression. He sat down behind the tall desk and looked out at the room. Be seated, he said, and everyone sat back down. The judge began calling cases. Joe listened as people went forward one by one. Some argued about speeding tickets. Some made excuses about parking violations. The judge listened to each person and then made his decision. Joe's hands were sweaty. He had never been good at speaking in front of people. When he was younger, he had dreamed of being a teacher, but after Vietnam, he couldn't handle being the center of attention. He had worked in a factory instead, fixing machines in the back where he could be alone. Case number 47, the court officer called. Joseph Miller, charged with failing to stop at a stop sign on Oak Street, April 15th. Joe stood up. His legs felt shaky. That's me, Your Honor, he said. Judge Howard looked at the paper in front of him. Mr. Miller, do you understand the charge? Against you? Yes, Your Honor, Joe said. I missed the stop sign. I was wrong. The judge looked surprised. Most people tried to make excuses or argue about their tickets. Joe was simply admitting his mistake. The fine for this violation is $120, Judge Howard said. Do you wish to contest this charge? Joe shook his head. No, Your Honor. I was wrong, and I accept the fine. He didn't mention that $120 was nearly half of what he had left for the month after paying his rent and bills. He would have to cut back on food and maybe ask to pay his electric bill late. Judge Howard studied Joe for a moment. He noticed the service pins on Joe's lapel. You served in Vietnam, Mr. Miller? Yes, Your Honor. 1969 to 1971. The judge nodded. He was about to speak when a small voice came from beside Joe. He's a hero, Your Honor. Everyone in the courtroom turned to look at Lily. The court officer frowned and stepped forward, but Judge Howard held up his hand to stop him. Young lady, the judge said, we don't usually allow comments from the audience. I'm sorry, Lily said, not looking sorry at all, but Mr. Miller is too humble to tell you himself. Joe felt his face grow warm with embarrassment. He wasn't used to anyone speaking up for him. For most of his life, he had been invisible. Is that so? Judge Howard said. He looked thoughtful. Mr. Miller, do you know this young lady? We just met today, Your Honor. Joe explained. She noticed my service pins. Lily wheeled forward a little. My class learned about veterans last month, she told the judge. Our teacher said we should always thank them for their service and show respect. The courtroom was very quiet now. Everyone was watching the little girl in the wheelchair and the old veteran standing beside her. Judge Howard removed his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth. When he put them back on, he looked directly at Joe. Mr. Miller, he said, I'm going to take your service into consideration. The court recognizes the sacrifice made by our veterans. Joe stood straighter, the old, military posture coming back to him automatically. However, the judge continued, the law still applies to everyone equally. Joe nodded. I understand, Your Honor. Judge Howard tapped his pen against the desk. He seemed to be thinking hard about something. Mr. Miller, he said finally, I'm going to offer you an alternative. The courtroom was silent as everyone waited to hear what Judge Howard would say. Joe Miller stood tall, though his back hurt from standing so long. Lily looked up at the judge with hopeful eyes. Mr. Miller, Judge Howard said, instead of paying the fine, I will allow you to do 20 hours of community service. Joe nodded slowly. Thank you, Your Honor. What kind of community service? The judge looked at Lily, then back at Joe. I think you have something valuable to offer our community, especially our young people. Judge Howard wrote something on a piece of paper. You will visit Oak Hill Elementary School once a week for the next 5 weeks. You will spend 2 hours each visit talking with students about your experiences and the importance of civic duty. The remaining 10 hours can be spent helping in the school library. Joe's mouth opened in surprise. This was not what he expected. Speak to children? About his experiences? The thought made his heart beat faster with anxiety. Your Honor, Joe began. I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. I don't talk much these days. Judge Howard's face softened just a bit. Mr. Miller, that young lady sitting next to you seems to think you have something worth sharing. I'm inclined to agree with her. Lily was bouncing slightly in her wheelchair with excitement. I go to Oak Hill Elementary, she said. I'm in Mrs. Bell's 3rd grade class. Joe looked down at Lily, then back at the judge. I understand, Your Honor, he said finally. I accept your decision. Judge Howard nodded. The court clerk will give you the paperwork with all the details. Principal Nancy Gray at Oak Hill has already agreed to this arrangement. You'll start next Monday. With a tap of his gavel, the judge called the next case. Joe stepped back, feeling slightly dazed. Lily wheeled close to Joe. This is so cool. You're going to come to my school? Joe managed a small smile. It seems that way. They walked out of the courtroom together. Susan was waiting for them in the hallway. What happened? She asked Lily. I saw you go in with Mr. Miller. Lily explained everything excitedly, her words tumbling out fast. And now he's coming to my school to talk about being a veteran instead of paying a fine. Susan looked at Joe with surprise and interest. That's quite unusual. Judge Howard must have seen something special in you, Mr. Miller. Joe shook his head. I think he saw something special in your daughter, ma'am. She spoke up for me in there. Nobody's done that for me in a very long time. Susan put her hand on Lily's shoulder. That sounds like my Lily. She has a way of seeing the good in people. Joe shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to this much conversation or attention. I should go get that paperwork from the clerk, he said. Of course, Susan replied. Lily, we should let Mr. Miller take care of his business. But Lily wasn't ready to say goodbye. Mom, can Mr. Miller come have lunch with us, please? I want to tell him all about my class. Susan hesitated, looking at Joe. She didn't know this man, but he seemed kind and gentle, and Lily rarely got this excited about meeting new people. Would you like to join us for lunch, Mr. Miller? Susan asked. Nothing fancy, just the diner, across the street. My treat. Joe was about to say no automatically. He usually ate alone. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the hopeful look on Lily's face. Or maybe it was the kindness in Susan's eyes. That would be nice, he said, surprising himself. Thank you. After Joe got his paperwork, they walked across the street to the diner. Lily chatted the whole way, telling Joe about her school and her friends and her teacher, Mrs. Bell. The diner was busy with the lunch crowd, but they found a table by the window. The waitress brought menus and water. "They have the best grilled cheese sandwiches here," Lily informed Joe seriously. "That's what I always get." Joe looked at the menu prices and felt relieved when Susan reminded him that lunch was her treat. His small pension didn't leave room for eating out. They ordered their food: grilled cheese for Lily, a turkey sandwich for Susan, and a bowl of soup for Joe. While they waited, Lily continued telling Joe all about Oak Hill Elementary. "Mrs. Bell is going to be so excited," Lily said. "We just finished a unit about American heroes. She's going to think you're the perfect guest speaker." Joe sipped his water nervously. "I don't know about that. I'm not good at speaking to groups." Susan smiled gently. "Just talk to them the way you talk to Lily. Children appreciate honesty more than fancy words." Their food arrived and they ate while continuing to chat. Joe couldn't remember the last time he had shared a meal with anyone. It felt strange but nice. "Do you have family nearby, Mr. Miller?" Susan asked. Joe shook his head. "No, ma'am. My parents passed years ago. I never married. My only brother lives in Arizona, but we don't keep in touch much." "So you live alone?" Lily asked, a bit of cheese hanging from her chin. "Lily," Susan said, "that's a personal question." "It's all right," Joe assured her. "Yes, Lily. I live alone, in a small apartment on Pine Street." "Do you have any pets?" Lily continued her questions. Joe smiled slightly. "No pets. My building doesn't allow them." "That's sad," Lily declared. "Everyone needs somebody, even if it's just a goldfish." Joe chuckled, a rusty sound that surprised even him. "Maybe you're right about that." As they finished their lunch, Joe felt more relaxed than he had in years. There was something about Lily's open curiosity and Susan's quiet kindness that put him at ease. "I should get going," Joe said as he finished his soup. "Thank you for lunch, Ms. Mason." "Please call me Susan," she replied, "and it was our pleasure." Lily looked up at Joe with bright eyes. "Will you really come to my class on Monday?" Joe nodded solemnly. "I gave my word to the judge. I'll be there." "Promise?" Lily pressed. "I promise," Joe said. As they said goodbye, outside the diner, Joe realized he was actually looking forward to Monday. It had been a long time since he had something to look forward to. The weekend passed slowly for Joe. He spent much of it thinking about what he would say to the children. He found his old photo album in the closet, the one he hadn't looked at in years. The pictures of his unit in Vietnam brought back difficult memories, but also some good ones. The camaraderie, the way they had looked out for each other. Joe also found the small box where he kept his medals. Besides the Purple Heart, he had several other commendations. He had never displayed them, never talked about them. Maybe it was time to share these stories. On Sunday night, Joe ironed his best shirt and polished his shoes. He wanted to look respectable for his first visit to Oak Hill Elementary. He was still nervous about speaking to a classroom full of children, but he kept thinking about his promise to Lily. Monday morning arrived with sunshine and blue skies. Joe got up early, ate a small breakfast, and walked to the bus stop. The school was on the other side of town. As the bus drove through the streets, Joe felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. What would the children think of him? What would he say? Would they be bored by an old man's stories? The bus stopped 2 blocks from the school. Joe thanked the driver and walked the rest of the way, his photo album and medal box in a paper bag under his arm. Oak Hill Elementary was a red brick building with a playground on one side and a big American flag flying in front. Children were arriving, some on foot, some on bikes, some being dropped off by parents. Joe took a deep breath and walked up the steps to the main entrance. A sign directed visitors to check in at the office. As he approached the office door, he heard a familiar voice. "Mr. Miller, you came." Joe turned to see Lily wheeling toward him down the hallway, her face bright with excitement. She wore a blue dress today and her blonde hair was tied back with matching ribbons. "Good morning, Lily," Joe said, feeling relieved to see a familiar face. I promised I would come. I told everyone about you, Lily said. The whole class is waiting. A woman walked up behind Lily. She was tall, with short brown hair and a kind smile. You must be Mr. Miller, she said, extending her hand. I'm Nancy Gray, the principal. Judge Howard called me about your community service arrangement. Jo shook her hand. Yes, ma'am. I hope this isn't too much trouble for the school. Principal Gray shook her head. Not at all. We're always looking for community members to speak with our students. Veterans especially have important stories to share. Jo nodded, still nervous but trying not to show it. I brought some photos and my medals, he said, lifting the paper bag slightly. I wasn't sure what would be appropriate. That sounds perfect, Principal Gray assured him. Mrs. Bell's class has been studying American history, so your visit fits right in with their curriculum. Lily tugged at Jo's sleeve. Come on, Mr. Miller. Our class is this way. Principal Gray smiled. It seems you already have a guide. I'll walk with you. They followed Lily down the colorful hallway. The walls were covered with children's artwork and educational posters. Jo noticed that the school was built to accommodate wheelchairs with wide hallways and ramps alongside the few steps. Here we are, Lily announced, stopping at a classroom door decorated with paper stars. Each star had a student's name on it. Principal. Gray knocked on the door, which opened to reveal a classroom full of 8- and 9-year-old children. They sat at desks arranged in small groups, all looking expectantly toward the door. A woman in her 30s with glasses and curly red hair stood at the front of the room. Good morning, Principal Gray, she said. Then she smiled at Jo. And you must be Mr. Miller. I'm Karen Bell, Lily's teacher. Jo nodded, suddenly feeling very out of place. All the children were staring at him. Some looked curious, some looked bored, some whispered to each other behind their hands. Class, Mrs. Bell said in a clear voice. This is Mr. Miller. He's a veteran who served our country in Vietnam, and he's here to talk with us today. Good morning, Mr. Miller, the children said together, clearly practiced in this greeting. Good morning, Jo replied, his voice a bit shaky. Lily wheeled to her spot at one of the desk groups and turned to face the front of the room with an encouraging smile for Jo. Mrs. Bell gestured to a chair set up at the front of the classroom. Mr. Miller, would you like to sit here? And perhaps you could start by telling the class a little about yourself and your service. Jo sat down, placing his paper bag on his lap. 25 young faces looked at him, waiting. His heart was pounding. He hadn't spoken to a group this size in decades. Well, he began hesitantly. My name is Joseph Miller. Most people call me Joe. I grew up right here in this town many years ago. A little boy with glasses raised his hand. How old are you, Mr. Miller? Mrs. Bell started to say something about polite questions, but Jo smiled slightly. I'm 68 years old. I was born in 1957. That's older than my grandpa, a girl with braids exclaimed. Jo nodded. I might be. I was 19 years old when I went to Vietnam. That was in 1976. Where is Vietnam? Asked another child. Jo looked at Mrs. Bell, who walked to a world map on the wall. Vietnam is here, she said, pointing to the country. It's in Southeast Asia. Jo stood up and walked to the map. His nervousness was fading as he focused on answering the children's questions. When I was your age, we called this whole area Indochina, he explained, his finger tracing the region. Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. He returned to his chair and opened his paper bag. I brought some photographs to show you what Vietnam looked like. The children leaned forward in their seats as Jo pulled out his photo album. Mrs. Bell brought over a document camera connected to a screen at the front of the room. You can place the photos under this camera, she explained, and everyone will be able to see them on the screen. Jo carefully placed his first photo under the camera. It showed a much younger Jo in his uniform, standing with 3 other soldiers, in front of a tent. The jungle background was thick with vegetation. This was my unit, Jo explained. We were called the Fighting Eagles. This is me, and these are my friends, Rick, Danny, and Carlos. You look so young, Lily said from her desk. Joe nodded. We were all young. Most of us were just out of high school. A boy with red hair raised his hand. Did you have to kill people? He asked bluntly. The classroom went quiet. Mrs. Bell stepped forward with a concerned expression, but Joe held up his hand. That's a fair question, he said quietly. War is a very serious thing. Sometimes soldiers do have to fight, but most of my job was protecting people and keeping the peace. He changed the photo to one showing him helping to build a small bridge in a village. We also helped local people with things like building bridges in schools. For the next 30 minutes, Joe showed photos and answered questions. With each photo and each question, he became more comfortable. The children were genuinely interested, especially when he showed them pictures of Vietnamese children about their age. Did you get hurt in the war? A quiet girl in the back asked. Joe nodded. Yes, I did. He reached into his bag and took out the small box with his medals. He carefully opened it and held up his Purple Heart. This medal is called a Purple Heart. It's given to soldiers who are wounded in battle. Can we see it? Several children asked at once. Joe hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but it needs to be handled very carefully. It's very special to me. Mrs. Bell suggested they form a line, and one by one the children came up to look at the medal. Joe held it out for each child, to see up close. When it was Lily's turn, he carefully placed it in her small hand. It's heavier than it looks, Lily said with surprise. Yes, Joe agreed. Medals often are. When all the children had seen the medal, Joe put it back in its box. He felt different now than when he had first entered the classroom. The nervous feeling was gone, replaced by something warm and good. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Bell said, we have about 15 minutes left. Would you mind if the children ask a few more questions? That would be fine, Joe said. Hands shot up all around the room. Joe pointed to a boy near the front. Are you still friends? With those guys in the photo? The boy asked. Joe's face grew serious. Rick and Danny didn't make it home from the war, he said quietly. Carlos and I stayed friends for many years, but he passed away 5 years ago. The children were silent, taking in this sad information. Is that why you're alone now? Lily asked. Because your friends are gone? Joe looked at her thoughtful face. That's part of it, he admitted. When you lose people who understand what you've been through, it can be hard to connect with others. But you're connecting with us, Lily pointed out. And we understand you now, at least a little bit. Joe felt something warm in his chest. Yes, he said. I suppose you do. As the class time came to an end, Mrs. Bell thanked Joe for coming. This has been wonderful for the children, she said. Would you be willing to come back next week as planned? To his own surprise, Joe nodded without hesitation. Yes, I'd like that. As the children lined up to go to their next activity, many of them waved goodbye to Joe or said thank you. Lily wheeled over to him. You did great, Mr. Miller, she said. Everyone liked your stories. Joe smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Thank you for speaking up for me in court, Lily. I wouldn't be here otherwise. Lily grinned. Sometimes, grown-ups need a little help, she said wisely. As Joe prepared to leave, Principal Gray approached him again. Mr. Miller, would you mind stopping by my office before you go? I have a proposition for you. Joe followed Principal Gray to her office, wondering what proposition she might have. The office was small but neat, with children's artwork on the walls and a vase of fresh flowers on the desk. Please have a seat, Mr. Miller, Principal Gray said, gesturing to a chair. Would you like some coffee or water? Water would be nice, thank you, Joe replied. His throat was dry from all the talking he had done in the classroom. Principal Gray poured him a glass of water from a pitcher on her desk. Mr. Miller, I was very impressed with how you connected with the children today. Joe took a sip of water. Thank you, they're good kids. They asked thoughtful questions. They did, Principal Gray agreed. But not all adults can answer children's questions about difficult subjects so honestly and appropriately. You have a gift for it. Joe looked down at his hands. He wasn't used to receiving compliments. I just tried to tell them the truth in a way they could understand. Principal Gray smiled. That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. Oak Hill Elementary has been trying to start a Veterans in Schools program for some time now. We want our students to learn about service and sacrifice from people who have lived it. Joe nodded, listening carefully. Your community service with us will end after 5 visits, Principal Gray continued. But I'd like to offer you a volunteer position after that. You would visit different classrooms once or twice a month, sharing your experiences and helping students understand what it means to serve your country. Joe's eyes widened in surprise. You want me to keep coming back, even after my community service is done? Yes, Principal Gray said. Based on what I saw today, you would be perfect for this role. The children respond to you, and you clearly have important stories to share. Joe thought about this. A few weeks ago, he would have said no immediately. The idea of regularly speaking to groups of children would have terrified him. But today had changed something. I think I'd like that, he said slowly. It felt good to talk about my experiences. For a long time, I kept everything bottled up inside. Principal Gray nodded. Many veterans do, but sharing your story can be healing, both for you and for others. Joe agreed to think about the offer and let her know his decision after completing his required 5 visits. As he left the principal's office, he felt lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. In the hallway, he met Susan, who was picking Lily up from school. Mr. Miller, she said with a warm smile. Lily texted me that your visit went wonderfully. She was so excited. It did go well, Joe admitted. Better than I expected. Susan looked at him curiously. You seem different today, more present. Joe considered this. I think I am. Talking to the children brought back memories, but not just the bad ones. Good ones, too. They walked together to the school entrance. Lily would be finishing her last class soon. Would you like to join us for dinner tonight? Susan asked. Lily would love it, and I make a pretty good lasagna. Joe hesitated only briefly. That sounds nice, thank you. While they waited for Lily, Joe told Susan about Principal Gray's volunteer offer. Susan's face brightened. That's a wonderful idea, she said. You made quite an impression on them. Joe shrugged modestly. I just told them about my experiences. Sometimes that's all it takes, Susan replied. People want to be seen and heard. Even children, especially children, can tell when someone is being genuine with them. Lily appeared then, wheeling down the ramp at full speed. Mr. Miller, you're still here, she exclaimed happily. Your mother invited me for dinner, Joe explained. If that's okay with you. Yes, Lily said, pumping her fist in the air. Can we show him my medals, Mom? Susan nodded. Of course. Joe looked confused. Medals? You'll see, Lily said with a mysterious smile. That evening, Joe arrived at Susan and Lily's small house with a bouquet of flowers and a box of cookies from the bakery. He hadn't been to someone's home for dinner in years, and he felt both nervous and excited. The house was cozy and accessible, with ramps and wide doorways for Lily's wheelchair. Family photos lined the walls, many showing Lily before her accident, standing and running like other children. After a delicious dinner of lasagna and garlic bread, Lily announced it was time to show Joe her medals. They're in my room, she said. Come on. Joe followed Lily to her bedroom, which was painted light purple and decorated with stars. On one wall hung several medals and ribbons. These are my swimming medals, Lily explained proudly. I started swimming after my accident. My doctor said it was good therapy, but I do it because it's fun. Joe stepped closer to look at the medals. There were at least a dozen of them, all from different competitions. That's impressive, Joe said sincerely. You must be very good. Lily shrugged. I work hard at it. When I'm in the water, I don't feel different from anyone else. I can move freely. Joe nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. We all need something that makes us feel free. What makes you feel free, Mr. Miller? Lily asked. Joe thought about it. I'm not sure anymore. It used to be riding my motorcycle, but I sold it years ago. Maybe you need to find something new, Lily suggested. Later, as Susan drove Joe home, they talked more about the school's volunteer program and about Lily's swimming. She has a competition this Saturday, Susan mentioned. She'd love it if you came to watch. Joe hadn't been to a public event in years. The thought of crowds made him uncomfortable, but the hopeful look in Susan's eyes made him reconsider. I'd like to be there, he said finally. What time does it start? The next few weeks passed quickly. Joe completed his 5 required visits to Oak Hill Elementary, each one easier than the last. He shared more photos and stories, and the children's questions helped him see his experiences in a new light. He attended Lily's swimming competition, cheering loudly when she won a silver medal in her age group. The noise and crowds were difficult, but watching Lily's determination made it worthwhile. After completing his community service, Joe accepted Principal Gray's offer to become a regular volunteer. He also started attending a support group for veterans at the local VA hospital, something he had avoided for years. 3 months after their chance meeting at the courthouse, Joe, Susan, and Lily sat together on a park bench, feeding ducks at the pond. It was a warm summer day, and Lily had just finished telling Joe about her science project. You know, Joe said thoughtfully, if I had stopped at that stop sign, we would never have met. Susan smiled. Sometimes the best things come from our mistakes. Lily looked up at Joe. Are you still sad a lot? You used to look sad when we first met you. Joe considered the question. Not as much anymore, he said honestly. I still have difficult days, but they don't seem as dark as before. Is it because you're not alone? Lily asked. Joe nodded, gently patting her hand. That's a big part of it. You and your mother showed me that I still have something to offer, something worth sharing. Mom says everyone has gifts to share, Lily said. Sometimes they just need help finding them. Joe looked at Susan, who blushed slightly. There was a growing warmth between them, a friendship that hinted at the possibility of something more. Your mom is a wise woman, Joe said. A month later, Judge Howard was surprised to see Joe Miller back in his courtroom. This time, Joe wasn't there for a traffic violation. He was there with Lily's class on a field trip to learn about the justice system. The judge smiled when he recognized Joe standing tall beside a group of children, including Lily in her wheelchair. Joe looked different now, more confident, more present. He wore his service pins proudly on his jacket. Welcome to the court, Mr. Miller, Judge Howard said. I'm pleased to see you again under better circumstances. Joe nodded respectfully. Thank you, Your Honor. Your sentence turned out to be exactly what I needed. The judge's eyes twinkled. Justice works in mysterious ways sometimes, he said, and it often comes from unexpected directions. He glanced at Lily, who beamed back at him. As the children asked the judge questions about his job, Joe stood back and watched. 6 months ago, he had been a lonely man with little hope for the future. Now, because a little girl in a wheelchair had greeted a veteran in court, his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. Sometimes the most unexpected meetings change everything, and sometimes the greatest gifts come in the smallest packages.